In just over a month, the Florida legislature will convene in Tallahassee. Tonight, we're joined by the local members of the Northwest Florida delegation for a preview of the 2015 session. Our broadcast is originating from the Phyllis and Michael Johnson studio. We are live and interactive on television and on radio. Legislative review, dialogue with the delegation is straight ahead.
This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
And a very pleasant good evening, everyone. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for joining us. In addition to our television broadcast here on WSRE TV, our program is also being heard on News Radio 1620. All in all, 2014 was a pretty good year for the state of Florida. The Sunshine State became the third largest state in the nation, surpassing New York. Economic conditions steadily improved. Lawmakers left about $1 billion in budget surplus, and another year passed without a major hurricane. Nonetheless, there's still much to focus on across a broad spectrum of issues. Healthcare, education, and economic growth are still in the spotlight. But other hot-button topics like medical marijuana and guns on college campuses are sure to gain plenty of attention. We invite your questions tonight as we discuss the 2015 session with our members of the Northwest Florida delegation. You can call us at 850-484-1223 or toll free at 1-800-239-WSRE or email questions@wsre.org. Let me begin this evening by introducing our panel. From the Senate, District 1, Senator Don Gates. Senator Gates is coming off a 2-year term as Senate President. District 1 includes Bay, Holmes, Jackson, Washington, and parts of Okaloosa counties. From Senate District 2, Senator Greg Evers. District 2 covers Escambia, Santa Rosa, and Okaloosa counties. From the Florida House of Representatives, Clay Ingram. From District 1, which includes parts of Escambia County. From District 4, Representative Matt Gates. District 4 covers part of Okaloosa County. From District 2, Representative Mike Hill. District 2 covers parts of Escambia and Santa Rosa counties. From District 3, Representative Doug Broxson. District 3 covers parts of Okaloosa and Santa Rosa counties. Gentlemen, welcome back. Happy New Year. Glad each and every one of you from our delegation were able to make it this year. Let me begin with you, Senator Gates. Good couple of years as Senate President. What do you focus on now moving forward? What's your top priority?
Well, I think now we have an opportunity to make some very important choices for the future of our state. Today, the governor announced his proposed budget with record tax reductions being proposed, record increases in investment in education. It's a time, as you indicated in your opening, when economic growth is encouraging. We haven't rounded all of the corners for everybody yet, but employment is up, unemployment is down, surpluses are up, and we have a chance to, I think, make some very significant investments in education, in infrastructure, and in economic development.
All right. I want to run through and kind of ask each one of you the same question just as we get the ball rolling here. Senator Evers, what's kind of your top priority this time around?
Well, this time around, I was made chair of criminal justice, which will actually be the 5th and 6th year that I've been in criminal justice. And I was put with the task of revamping DOC with the deaths, with the problems that we've had in the prisons over the past few years. That's been cast upon me, and I've made it my top priority.
All right, very good. Representative Ingram, how about yourself?
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having us tonight, first of all.
Our pleasure.
I'm so excited about going into this session because, we think back to 2010 when we were elected and how bad things were. Everything was suffering. The private sector was in turmoil. All the things that depended on the tax base to be funded, education, healthcare, transportation, were all in turmoil also. And we had to cut and cut. The pressure was on us to increase taxes and fees to fund those needed programs, but we resisted that urge and made sure that we focused on cutting taxes, regulation, and now because we showed that fiscal discipline, we're heading into some good times. We'll have to continue to show that discipline and fight the urge to tax and spend. Not that any of us would or will, but to kind of focus on what I'll be doing this session, I chair the Transportation and Economic Development Appropriations Subcommittee. I know it's a mouthful, but we'll have about a $13 billion transportation and economic development budget, and so we'll make sure that that money's appropriated. Obviously, first that the Panhandle gets what Senator Gates has fought so hard to get us in the first place, and then to make sure our economic development apparatus is well funded, and we continue to bring businesses into the state, and then make sure the businesses that are here are able to thrive and grow.
All right, and Representative Gates.
Well, Jeff, you mentioned in your intro that Florida will have about $1 billion in extra revenue this year. Now, that's not a function of anything that the government has done. That's a function of the great success that the people of Florida have had in building commerce and engaging in economic activity. So I've got the radical idea that rather than finding a billion new ways for the government to spend that money, we ought to be creative in returning that money to the taxpayers of the state of Florida. I think the governor has shown great wisdom and enthusiasm. He wants to cut the cell phone tax. When I get my cell phone bill, I feel like every governmental entity from the state to the county to the municipality is taking a little piece out of me. And if we can find a way to reduce that tax burden on Florida's families, we're reducing the tax on communicating, which is such a fundamental part of the economy. I've also heard from a number of teachers and parents, and even frankly some students in our school systems, that while they believe in accountability, we're testing so frequently and so often that we're losing that pedagogical experience where teachers can teach and students can learn. So if we can find ways to optimize our testing system where we're still accountable, but our tests get better and less frequent, I think that's a win for all of Florida.
Very good. Representative Hill.
Well, Jeff, you mentioned in your opening comments of how Florida has recently become the third largest state in terms of population. And what's interesting is last year we passed a budget of $77.1 billion. New York, the state which we overtook, had a budget of $141 billion. That's a testament to conservative ideals, conservative principles that this entire delegation believes in, and we need to continue in that sort of direction. I'm pleased to be working on a committee with Chairman Matt Gates, Finance and Tax, and we're going to see as many ways as possible as we can remove that tax burden from our citizens here in Florida.
And Representative Broxson.
Last year, we almost had 100 million people come to Florida to visit. On top of that, we've had enormous growth in our business sector. We've sent a signal to the world that we're open for business, and we also sent another signal. We're in the counties that represent a major portion of the military operations in this state. And we said that Florida is going to be the friendliest military state in the Union. And President Gates led that charge. We all got behind it. And I tell you, over the next few years, you're going to see that impact hit our people, and they're going to come to Florida, and they're going to stay in Florida.
Okay, very good. Let me just throw this up, just play a little bit of a devil's advocate here for you. The $1 billion surplus, there have been some press reports of folks say, well, with the tax breaks, it's going to eat all of that up. Would it be prudent, obviously we all like tax breaks, we all want tax breaks, but would it be prudent to keep some of that because, as we all know, the economy does ebb and flow, so to speak, for a rainy day? Does that make sense?
Well, we have a multi-billion-dollar rainy day fund that we keep as conservatives. Remember, that was a fund that had been depleted under a Democratic rule in the state of Florida, and it was one of the first things when Republicans took control of the legislature and the governor's mansion that we reinstituted. We have a budget stabilization fund, but look at last year. Last year, we provided $500 million in tax relief to Florida's families by reducing fees on driver's licenses and tag renewals, and then that led to a $1 billion surplus. So there is at times an arrogance in government that we know best how to invest money to create economic activity. And of course, there are investments we have to make in good schools and good transportation infrastructure, but we need to stick to the four corners of the Constitution and what our true role is, and then let the people of Florida do the heavy lifting and the real work of making this economy thrive. And when we give them that opportunity, we've seen remarkable successes.
Very good. Let me just mention again that our phone lines are open. If you would like to call in a question or if you would like to email a question, you can email questions@WSRE.org or call us at 850-484-1223 or 800-239-WSRE. And we do have quite a few questions from viewers and constituents, and we're going to get to those in just a moment. But let me throw out just kind of an open question here for all of you. I know you've been traveling around throughout the district. What are the constituents telling you? What's the feeling like? What's the consumer, what's the business person feeling right now?
Well, what I'm hearing as we do neighborhood days around the district is, leave us alone. Please don't apply any more governmental regulations. Try to make it easier for us to get into business, to stay in business. Where we have unfair obstacles in front of us, try to smooth them out so that we can compete with the people that we have to compete with, and that's businesses in Alabama and businesses in Georgia. That's what I'm hearing. People basically saying, government doesn't need to do more for me, it just needs to quit doing more to me.
Yeah. Rest of you pretty much agree with that?
Absolutely, Jeff. I've heard the same thing, and I've heard it couched as do no harm. Mm-hmm. And what harm is there, try to remove it. So I'm hearing the exact same thing, Senator Gates.
Yeah. It's interesting because things have changed a lot. You mentioned, Representative Ingram, when we started this several years ago, how rough things were as we came out of the financial crisis. So your sense overall is that people are feeling a lot better.
Well, we all voted 10 years ago not to have any more hurricanes, and that moratorium may be running out. And that's a good reason to keep money in a rainy day fund. Florida has the third of the world's catastrophic exposure. We will have a storm in the future, and Florida needs to be ready, and we need to be physically responsible in preparation for that.
Since you brought that up, let's talk about homeowners insurance. When can we expect to see some downward pressure on homeowners rates, number one? And number two, what's the status right now of Citizens Insurance?
Well, the hard answer and the unfortunate answer is we're not going to see plummeting homeowners insurance rates. I wish we could. I wish we could pass a law that would say risk is less and homeowners insurance companies will charge us less. But that's not going to happen, and it's because of what Representative Broxson said, that we have a huge coast, and that coast represents substantial risks and the greatest risk in the United States. Now, the latest about Citizens is that because of the new members on the Citizens Board, including people from Northwest Florida, Citizens Board has now voted to eliminate the surcharge, so now the rest of us aren't going to be charged extra money for Citizens. Instead, Citizens will be a smaller book of business and will operate on its own without subsidies from the rest of the people of Florida, and I think that's a huge victory, one that all of us have been pushing for years.
And as I understand it, some progress is being made, though, with more insurers coming in, because as you mentioned, I think Citizens has gone from something like 1.5 million policyholders to maybe 600,000. So I guess it's a little bit more inviting than what it had been. So shall we take that as a positive, I suppose?
Jeff, I just recently returned from Orlando, where the Florida Chamber sponsored an insurance summit. And what you just said is exactly correct. The number of policyholders who are in Citizens has declined dramatically. Now, in terms of its premium also going down, they can't make that adjustment just yet because of an effect called assignment of benefits. And that is where, particularly with water claims, we have information from Citizens now that more than half of their claims are from water damage. But also a great percentage of those water damage claims that they are receiving, their first call is not coming from a customer, but it's coming from a lawyer. And it's called this assignment of benefits, where instead of the insurance company dealing directly with the customer in terms of filing a claim, that the customer, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes they do know, they will sign this form, which says we are assigning all of our benefits that we have to this policy to the restoration company, who is then working with lawyers, and it is causing the price of the claim to escalate dramatically, 3 times, 4 times what it should be. Until we get a handle on that, we may not see insurance premiums dropping this year.
Okay, very good. Well, let me get to some questions from some of our viewers, and I'll begin this evening, and this is kind of an open for all the legislators, from a viewer this evening. She is asking, or actually making a statement up front, the health of the people in Escambia County has been over and over deemed very poor. She says we have many people who are working low-wage jobs and have no opportunity to receive health care. She says they fall in the crevice of being too rich for Medicaid and too poor for ACA, the Affordable Care Act, or also known as Obamacare. The answer, she says, and this is a statement, is Medicaid expansion. You knew you'd get this question, and another question came in that basically said, is increasing Medicaid to almost 1 million of Florida's underinsured a priority this year? So the Medicaid expansion question for 2015.
Right now in the state of Florida, 1 out of every 6 Floridians is on Medicaid. If we expanded Medicaid the way President Obama would like us to do, it would be 1 in every 4 Floridians that's on Medicaid. And that's just an unsustainable economic model. 3 people cannot pay for the cost of their own health care and then a third of the cost of someone else's health care. And by the way, the cost of that Medicaid expansion is borrowed against the futures of our children because we draw that money down from the federal government, but it doesn't come from nowhere. It's deficit spending where we're then borrowing the money from China. Now, we have to improve health outcomes in Escambia County and really throughout all of Northwest Florida and the state. But the way to do that is to have a robust private market where people can buy the health insurance they need at a cost they're willing to pay. And that's not something that's impossible. Look at how great our auto insurance market is. You can't turn on the television without seeing different providers competing for our business. But the reason no one competes for our health business is because the healthcare decisions we make are all tied to our employer. So if we can create more of an a la carte system in Florida where people can buy the services they need and not buy what they don't need, then I think that we have an empowered consumer. Right now, healthcare costs are out of control. The healthcare portion of the state budget is out of control. And that's because when people receive medical care, they don't know the cost of that care because it's all passed on to an insurance company that goes through a group. So more power to people, common sense, free market principles, that's the answer, and it goes the opposite direction from where the president has tried to take us.
And how do we do that as a state?
Well, Jeff, I would tell you this. The part of your caller's question that I would agree with is that we have to do something with people who have low-income jobs in Escambia County. That's an issue that has to be resolved. And the way to do it is not with a government giveaway program where every 3 Floridians have to support a 4th Floridian for their health care. The answer, I think, is economic development in Escambia County so that we have better jobs and we're paying people more money. Because of the support and help of this delegation, these gentlemen who are here today, we were able to get a $30 million fund to induce new businesses, new companies that are here to expand as in the wake of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. That $30 million has generated, according to the Haas Center for Business Research, 9,000 new jobs that are coming online now, and those jobs are jobs that are paying people enough money so that they can work for a company that gives them health insurance or buy some health insurance of the kind that Matt has talked about. So the answer is not a government giveaway program. The answer is a more competitive market and better economic development. And thanks to this delegation working hard, we're making strides in that direction.
But Jeff, for years, special interests have gone into Florida statutes and created all kinds of protectionist laws, stop people from buying insurance across state lines, require them to buy insurance that they don't need. So actually, if we realize the humility of government and repealed some of the requirements that are in state law right now that solely exist to support the special interests that are in the market now and keep other people out, that's how you get to a more empowered consumer.
And I was just handed a question, a little bit of a follow-up on this. Will you accept, according to this particular viewer, will you accept billions of federal dollars to expand Medicaid? And I know we've covered this in past programs and how that works. So, but we'll cover it one more time because it's a topic of much interest.
Jeff, and maybe to explain to viewers who are not up to speed on the issue, to look back up 2 sessions back, the House voted to, or not voted to, it never actually came to a vote, but the House rejected the flat expansion of Medicaid, created a plan that would use state dollars to try to cover more needy Floridians. The Senate's idea was to, and I'll let the senator speak to it, but to accept some of the dollars and to buy private rate market insurance products. And the governor, of course, advocated for the full expansion of Medicaid. The 2 chambers and the governor never, had a meeting of the minds, and so that leaves us in the quandary that we're in now. Of course, you've heard the reasons that we feel that we would not have the flat expansion of Medicaid.
Do you think that things could change measurably given what has happened on the federal level with the recent election now that the Republicans control the House and the Senate? I don't think anybody really thinks Obamacare obviously is going to be rolled back because President Obama would obviously veto it. But there has been some talk, there may be some negotiations, some fine tuning and things along those lines. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's possible. At least I hope it's possible. The Senate took the position that we wanted to work with the federal government and create a Florida solution. where people would only get the insurance that they need. They wouldn't have to pay for insurance they don't need. The taxpayers wouldn't be on the hook for billions of dollars that they probably couldn't pay. So we tried, and on behalf of the Senate, I wrote to the Secretary of HHS in Washington and said, will you negotiate with us on a Florida solution that will help us provide more coverage to the most acutely needful people in the state? I didn't even get an answer. Then she left and her successor came. I wrote her a similar letter and we got a dear box holder answer. And that's because the president didn't feel he had to negotiate. Now there's a Republican Congress, and without being partisan, my sense is that they'd like to have the third largest state in the nation in the W column for the Affordable Care Act. I would hope they would be negotiable, but if they aren't negotiable, how can we ask our House partners to come off a position which has turned out to be prophetic? And that is, you can't trust the federal government to do what it says on health care.
I'll just, real quick.
What we did, Jeff, is that the president, in all fairness, overpromised and underdelivered. The Congressional Budget Office yesterday predicted that for every person they sign up for this new program, it's going to cost the federal government $50,000. That's $50,000 that we do not have, that, as Senator Gates says, it's going to cost our children and grandchildren. That money that they were going to send, the $50 billion, that did not come out of revenue. It came out of a borrowed pot of money, probably from China. That is not the right message, and that is not the message that we have to send to our constituents in Florida that we're buying into that program.
We could certainly.
Jeff, something that got me, I received a phone call yesterday from a lady, and she was complaining because she was on Social Security, and she was paying a little over $100 and something for the Obamacare coverage that she had for Part A and Part B and all the other parts. But they added $280 deduction to that. So now she's losing another $280. So she actually, her check was cut $350 when it was all said and done. And it's all related back to the Obamacare. So we're paying for it, even through the Social Security that you've worked, you've paid in all your life. And now we're having to pay for the Obamacare again.
Well, it's certainly going to be interesting to see what develops here over the next coming years, and we could do a whole show on that particular topic. Well, here's another one that is of much concern, not only in Florida but across the nation, and this comes from a viewer, and they're asking this, stating, first of all, we're seeing growing opposition to Common Core because of its detrimental effect on the efficiency and efficacy of education. When will Florida join? I'm repealing Common Core, the viewer says. I'm going to throw that one at you, Senator Gates.
Well, thanks. I think the fact is that Speaker Weatherford and I last year already wrote to the federal government and to Governor Scott and indicated that we did not want to be part of the testing regimen and the assessment regimen associated with Common Core. And so Florida pulled out. What we also did was, under the governor's leadership, we had public hearings all across the state asking people if there are standards problems that you have, if there's something wrong with a particular standard, writing, math, or any other kind of standard, bring the problem and offer a solution. And so as a result of those hearings, more than 100 changes were made in national standards. Now, I believe in the highest standards. If standards are high, they need to be higher. And if they're higher, they need to be higher still. But it seems to me that we shouldn't have federally dictated standards. And in Florida, we don't. We've adopted our own standards. And my hope is that we'll measure our students against national norms so that we'll know how our students are doing. You know, we're not just competing against ourselves. Our students will have to compete in an economy that crosses national, international boundaries. But some of the more noxious aspects of Common Core were taken out as a result of public hearings across the state.
Anyone else like to add to that? I feel like pretty much sums that up. Okay, I think everybody's in agreement on that. Here's a good question from one of our viewers, and Representative Hill, I'll address this to you. We're backtracking just a little bit, going back to an insurance question. The viewer says, why do citizens not insure property with aluminum wiring? The viewer says Florida is the only state that does not insure homes with aluminum wiring. I think that's something that's hit many people. That's a good question.
I actually deal with that because I am an insurance agent by profession. And what we find is they don't do it in all cases. Whenever a home is insured, an inspection of that home is done. And the position Citizens has taken is that aluminum wiring can be a fire hazard. And so they are very cautious about accepting a home with that aluminum wiring. But they will, after an inspection, if it passes that inspection process, they will insure a home with aluminum wiring.
Okay, very good. Here's a question from a viewer. Mentally ill / treatment versus incarceration. And the viewer is asking, doesn't it make more sense to provide treatment to the mentally ill rather than incarceration? You want to take that, Senator Evers?
Sure. In fact, our governor added additional millions of dollars to the budget of DOC that would allow for more mental beds. You know, we got into a situation through the budget cuts and everything to where we did away with our state mental hospitals and cut the bed capacity way back. So what we have done now is those inmates or those sick human beings that have a mental illness, they actually wound up going to our prisons. And we have got to have the additional space and to try to get them treatment, the ones that are in prison. Now, the ones that are out of prison, what we've got to do is expand the beds that, because mental illness has become a huge factor and it's cost the state a lot of money. And the only way that we can handle that is through additional treatment beds.
Okay. Another corrections question coming from a viewer here. Do you support more corrections jobs to keep us safe?
Well, the governor, in fact, added additional $17.5 million, which would also add 234 actual increase in the number of correction officers that we had. But through his budget, he also expanded, and it freed up an additional 400 jobs that we had that were reclassified and could be placed in corrections. So in all essence, we actually got about 634 more jobs for correction officers. Because of the fact that we need the correction officers, the governor also has placed $1 million into our local community colleges to do training and to get the credentials in the Criminal Justice Academy to where we will have enough officers. There was a graduating class that was done over in Santa Rosa County at the correctional institution over there through their fast track to move through the correctional process and actually get certified to be a correctional officer. They were 3 of those graduates went to the Santa Rosa Correctional Institution. And ultimately, when they put 3 in, they actually lost 4. So we're losing as many as we're putting in, and it's causing a shortfall in correctional officers. And that's the reason that the governor has placed this $1 million into the local colleges to actually fast track and get us more correctional officers out there.
Very good, very good. Another viewer question here is, now that employment is finally better, how can we ensure we don't repeat the Great Recession? Representative Ingram, I'll throw that one at you.
Yeah. First of all, I mean, we've seen how to turn the economy around. That's for government to get out of the way of free enterprise and business and allow that engine to reignite, and we've done that. Locally, we're on the right track. We have to also continue to pay attention to the economic development efforts that Senator Gates alluded to. since 2009, our unemployment rate locally was above 9%. It now is under 5.5%, around 5.4%. And the new jobs that have come, the average salary is $51,000. So we're doing something right, and we've got to continue to do the things we've done. And it's not rocket science. It's continue the effort to attract new companies and make it easier for existing businesses to thrive.
Okay. Here's another viewer question. She says SB 2 was recently introduced to ensure that Greyhound injuries and not just deaths are reported. Why are we still talking about this? The viewer says, who's sitting here tonight has the backbone to introduce a bill to completely outlaw, according to the viewer, the barbaric and inhumane sport of greyhound racing. Many, many other states, according to the viewer, already ban it. Why isn't Florida one of them?
I'd be happy to introduce a bill like that. The bill that your listener referred to that will require injury reporting, which is really the first step toward making sure the public understands what kind of activity we really got going on at some of these tracks. I'm proud to say is being named after my wife, Vicki Gates, because of her strong belief that these dogs ought not to be tortured and killed as they have been. So the answer is we have a bill in the Senate. It'll be heard in its first committee stop this coming Thursday. I hope it'll pass. Hope we'll send it over to our friends in the House and they'll take it up. And I'd be happy to introduce a bill like that. The problem, to outlaw it completely, the problem is that if I introduced a bill like that, it would not pass until and unless we can really get our arms around what we're going to do with gaming policy overall in the state. And I think President Gardner and Speaker Crisafulli are ready to work with the governor to do that.
Okay. Rest of you want to add to that?
I agree with the viewer. I think that we should get rid of the practice completely. I've been a sponsor of legislation that's done that in the past. Unfortunately, that legislation did not get a hearing, but I firmly believe that greyhound racing is not a creature of this century. And it not only is a black eye for the state of Florida, I think it erodes all of our collective humanity. I'd like to see it get completely out of our state and frankly, out of the entire social construct of our country.
Okay, very good. Another viewer question. Can we form a committee to address the access of technical trade schools for job creation? For example, in building the new jail for Escambia County, can a technical center be attached to the design? We can stop the violence with high-paying technical jobs which only require a ninth grade education. That's a good question, good point. What are your thoughts?
You know, Jeff, what we're doing, unfortunately, in prisons and in jails, is that we're suspending people's lives. If a person has a ticket and they go to jail, it's not like Marshall Dillon where you pay $50 or 5 days in jail. You pay $50 and the 5 days in jail. We have got to come up with a program where people are ready to go to work when they get out of prison or out of jail. And if they have a suspended license because they couldn't make a court appearance or they don't have the money to pay the ticket, those are not smart justice decisions. So hopefully in the next couple of years, we're going to have techniques where through work release and other programs where we can target those tickets or those fines that keep people from driving and being able to get to work. That is a job creator.
Well, technical education is not something that's just related to the corrections industry, though Representative Broxson is right. We've got to get away from an education model where what we pay for is time in a seat. That is a 20th century construct, and we have to move forward. And in Florida, the good news is we're doing that. Through the CAPE legislation that Senator Gates championed, Florida is now leading the country in the number of students we have enrolled in technical education courses. So tell them the numbers, Senator.
Well, this year we will have the 1 millionth Florida high school or middle school student who's enrolled in a course leading to national industry certification. The good news is over 60% of these students are actually getting the certifications based on credentials that are established by industry and awarded by industry. So the good news is we don't need to form a committee. God forbid we should form another committee. The good news is we're doing it already, and we need to do more of it.
Right. Yeah.
Jeff, there's a local company here in Pensacola, Smart Horizons, that is in the Department of Corrections contracts with and is in the jails, in the prisons, providing that highly technical education. And they have a highly innovative way of doing it where they start the student off or the inmate off in the subject matter that they're interested in. get their feet wet, getting back into the educational system, and then get into some of the core curriculum stuff they've got to have, the English and math and that sort of thing. But they get their feet wet in the things that they're interested in, whether it be computer science or whatever. So it's kind of neat that some of these innovative ideas are started right here in Pensacola.
Okay, good. And while we're on the subject of education, a viewer asking, what comments does anyone have on free community college? President Obama obviously mentioned that in his State of the Union address recently. So what are your thoughts on that? The viewer says, I thought we already had federal grants to qualifying students. What exactly does free mean? If everyone can go to free community college, then we'll have more educated people, but will they find employment? So
yeah, I mean, this is like the Obamacare of higher education. You know, you think higher education is expensive now? Wait till it's free. This is just grade 13 and grade 14. And it's the exact opposite of the paradigm that I'm presenting and that Senator Gates has championed and the rest of the delegation has supported. Instead of just paying for time in the seats, which is what President Obama's proposal does, why not instead create the right incentives for our community colleges to turn out graduates with industry certifications who can go get jobs? Why not instead pay the community colleges based on their job placement statistics rather than just trying to funnel people in? This highlights one of the big problems we have in the education space overall. We have an education system that is largely driven towards the interests of the adults in that system and not the students. This is not something that's going to fundamentally enhance skill sets just by spending more time in a seat. It's something that I think is created to have a larger education-based infrastructure and bureaucracy, and I don't think that's something that any members of our delegation support.
Absolutely. And Jeff, I would add to that, there is no such thing as a free college education, despite what the president was saying. In fact, he asked Congress for, it was some billions of dollars to help fund this program. Well, that comes from taxpayers all over the U.S. And so there is no such thing as having a free community college education, just like there's no such thing as a free lunch. It will have to be paid for somewhere.
Okay. Let's talk about marijuana, why don't we?
Well, gee, Jeff, we're 36 minutes into this show, which is actually the longest we've gone without a marijuana question.
Let's talk about it on a couple of different levels. I want to talk about Charlotte's Web. I want to talk about medical marijuana, and then I also want to address a question from a viewer. And the viewer says 58% of Florida voters voted in 2014 for medical marijuana. 1.3 million or more voted for Rick Scott. So, anyway, yeah, he's saying 1.3 million more than voted for the governor. Anyhow, he talks about Colorado collecting taxes with marijuana, so on and so forth, and obviously making his case that it should be legalized. Interesting bit in the question, though, I do think is that is worth addressing. Do you still feel that marijuana is a Class 1 felony drug? Are you willing to send thousands of citizens to prison on the taxpayer's dime? And anyway, so on and so forth. So the question is this. Do you feel it still ranks with the criminal, what he's saying, the felony criminal charges, number one? And number two, would you ever see it making sense from a tax collection standpoint to legalize marijuana for
Well, the gentleman on my right and left showed tremendous courage in supporting the legislation that I authored to make medical cannabis available through the Compassionate Medical Cannabis Act in this state. But we think that this has to be a cautious walk forward. I don't know that any of us are ready to go to a Colorado model where there frankly have been some pretty bad outcomes as it relates to the social fabrics of those communities and how to deal with some of the financial consequences that come with being a full recreational state. Now, that said, I think that we should continue to modernize our cannabis policy in Florida. We've made legal cannabis that is low in THC and can help vulnerable children who at times have as many as 30 seizures a day obtain relief. I believe that bill will be fully implemented within the next 90 days, and you'll see cannabis seeds going into the ground in the state of Florida in pretty short time. That's a step forward. But certainly for people in hospice care, people on chemo, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to go on chemo so that they can smoke a joint. Right. And so we're in the process of evolving. We've recognized that cannabis should not be a Schedule I narcotic, which is the point that the listener raised. And I believe that the federal government is actually changing their policies. In this latest omnibus package that was passed by the federal government, there was a devolution of authority on marijuana policy to states that had set up a regulatory structure. But I don't look at any other state in America with great envy over their cannabis policies. There seem to be challenges around the country. So We will continue the cautious walk forward. We'll continue to modernize our cannabis policy, but I don't think that we want to get to where Colorado is.
Okay, Charlotte's Web, and that's what you were talking about just
Right.
a couple of minutes. There has been some controversy surrounding that. Where are we right now as far as, you said you think it'll come about in 90 days or so?
I think that seeds could be going in the ground as soon as 90 days away. One administrative law judge invalidated rules that the Department of Health wrote that were pertinent to the statutes that we passed in the legislature. So unfortunately, that has created delay, and the Department of Health has rewritten those rules. And look, I mean, we can all recognize we're on a frontier here. It's not like you can just go lift up some other state's cannabis policy and drop it into Florida and expect it to work. So we're going to measure twice, cut once, end up with good policy, and then revise it as we go forward to make sure that we protect public safety, but also recognize the rationality of cannabis use as medicine when appropriate.
What is the difference between what you did last year with Charlotte's Web and the bill being proposed in the House this year regarding medical marijuana?
Well, the fundamental difference is that bill would allow for cannabis that has large amounts of THC in it, and that's the element that can get you high. And I think the collective view of our delegation is let's ride around the block with the training wheels on once or twice and see how the regulatory structure works with low THC cannabis before we dive headfirst in the shallow end of the pool with high THC cannabis. Now, can we get there? Probably, for highly vulnerable populations. We don't support someone walking in and claiming they have sleep apnea or restless leg syndrome and getting cannabis. But I think that we can get to where that bill is going. But first, let's see what's working and what's not working, and let's appropriately tailor our regulatory policy.
Okay. Any other gentleman like to add to that?
I get all the cannabis questions.
Yeah, it's all
Okay, very good.
what Matt said.
But you would never see, in Vermont, I think there's somewhat of an appetite right now that the legislature would pass for recreational use. You would never see at this stage in the game, and I think that's kind of where the viewer was going with this. You would not see that for recreational use.
Yeah, that's a little far from my liking. I think you see cannabis zap people of their motivation at times, and it can have challenges as a recreational drug. I don't know that any of us are wild about new recreational drugs in the market. Representative Ingram, why don't you tell them about the legislation you've worked on to make sure that people aren't recreationally using synthetic cannabis in the state?
That's right, and that's something we've worked on, since 2011, is to keep this terrible form of synthetic marijuana off the streets. And synthetic marijuana probably is a misnomer. It's a terrible psychotropic drug, and we don't really even know what it is often, and it's hard to test for. But it's something that has affected our students. I think most people have probably seen it hanging on the shelves in convenience stores and that sort of thing. We've done a great job of getting it off the streets. It affected students, members of the military. Those are the people locally who brought the problem to our attention, and we'll continue to fight that as the makers of those drugs continue to try to tweak the chemical formulas to make them legal and put them back on the shelves. But the Attorney General and the legislature, we've been aggressive toward trying to keep those drugs off the street.
Okay, very good. A lot of great viewer questions and listener questions this evening. Here's one that is not necessarily affecting us right here in Northwest Florida per se, but as a state, I think the viewer brings up a very good question. Why is Florida, the state legislature, authorizing spending hundreds of millions of dollars of sales tax money for maintenance and improvement for Florida's professional sports teams, stadiums, so on and so forth? Any of you guys want to take that?
Well, I'm not sure it's hundreds of millions. I think that might be a little bit of an exaggeration on the part of the questioner, but there have been proposals made to go before the legislature to provide incentives for professional sports teams to expand in Florida and therefore to bring more jobs to Florida. That's been the argument. I've been skeptical of those proposals right along. They're not going to build any stadiums in Niceville, I don't think. But also, I think we have to bear in mind that the way President Gardner and Senator Latvala from our Senate have put this together, there has to be, first of all, proof that jobs have been created that wouldn't have been there before, and then a clawback provision that lets taxpayers get the money back if the jobs aren't created. That's a whole lot better than the giveaways that we've had in the past, and I credit Senator Latvala and President Gardner with that. But I've been skeptical nonetheless.
Okay.
Jeff, I think what the governor said, that every dollar that we spend, we need to have a return on investment. The jury has returned a verdict. Stadiums are a horrible return on investment for our tax dollars. So I believe the bar is going to be very high in Tallahassee. It's going to have to be an extremely attractive with a very high return on investment to see the legislature bite in on that.
Okay. Here's another viewer question, and let me kind of target this at you, Representative Gates, because you mentioned it in your opening comments, talking a little bit about testing. The viewer says, how can we get back to basic education rather than our current emphasis on standardized testing?
Well, I don't know what the viewer means by basic education. I think that we have learned more than we've previously known. And so education is always evolving. It's not the same today as it was 50 years ago, and hopefully it won't be the same 50 years than it is now. The challenge that I hear from teachers and parents and students is that so much of a focus is on the testing, and there's so much classroom time dedicated to testing that the actual pedagogy, the actual learning and instruction has felt a squeeze as a result of that. Now, I want to make very clear, I believe in testing as a measure of accountability, and I think that tests ought to be standard across the board so we know how we're doing relative to our neighbors and people around the world. But if we get better tests and if we tailor our assessments appropriately, you won't have to have 2 months of testing out of the year. You'll be able to have valid, reliable measurements of student performance. By the way, we should pay teachers that improve student performance a heck of a lot more than the teachers who don't. And then I think we have a system that will continue to evolve effectively. Now I think we are mired in a bad situation with the Department of Education where because we don't have a reliable tool, we're using so many of them that we're squeezing the teaching and the learning.
Okay. Still have a lot of topics, and I'm going to summarize some of these questions that have come in from viewers. Same-sex marriage. Same-sex union, the question is your comments, your thoughts.
I'd like to speak to that. I think the people in our district are kind and generous people that believe that a marriage is between a man and a woman. I don't see a overwhelming sense that we want to do away with that. I certainly don't. I think there's practical reasons that a man and a woman get married. And I don't believe the Panhandle is going to be in the mix of seeing any major change in the next several years.
Jeff, you know, there was a constitutional amendment passed a number of years ago where the voters in Florida, citizens in Florida, said that marriage was defined to being between a man and a woman. But we recently had a federal judge overturn that. And it was very surprising that one person can go against the wishes of millions of Floridians. I think the people in Florida have spoken, and they believe that to keep that family structure of what is the foundation for a society is that marriage should be between a man and a woman.
Okay. Anybody else want to add? Had a follow-up viewer question who basically addressed what you were just saying, that a federal judge the question is, how can a federal judge override a voter's decision regarding same-sex? And the viewer goes on to ask, what's the point of voting? But I mean, you pretty much covered that in your comments on that. Daylight savings time. What's the status of the daylight savings bill, a viewer wants to know?
I knocked on one lady's door during my first campaign, and she said, you've got to do something about this daylight savings time. The extra hour of daylight is making my grass grow, and I'm having to cut it too often. So I'm still working on that issue, Jim.
Okay. Here's another testing question. What is the opinion of the panel of parents having the ability to opt out right in the testing process of the state's standardized test?
Well, I've asked the Commissioner of Education in writing to speak to opt out. You know, what are the consequences for teachers, for school districts, for students, for parents if students opt out? And if the listener will write to me or call me tomorrow, I'll send her a copy or him a copy of the Commissioner's response. Let me speak as a parent. Why in the world would I want my children not to be measured? Why would I not want to know whether my daughter or my son has made adequate progress during the school year? Why would I not want to know if they have problems in math or problems in reading and what those problems are? So it seems to me that opting out is probably not the answer. The answer is what Representative Gates said and what Governor Bush has said, and that is fewer tests and better tests.
Okay, very good. Anybody else want to add on to that, or pretty much in agreement with that? Another viewer question, why is there not automatic restoration of rights upon completion of a prison sentence?
Well, in Florida, we take the view that if someone engages in felonious conduct, they have shown such a disregard for our laws that they then don't get to participate in the selection of the people who make them.
Okay. Anybody want to add to any more? Okay. What do you intend to do regarding landfill regulation enforcement?
I'll speak to that, Jeff, because it seems to be an issue here in Escambia County and at a number of landfill sites. And in fact, there is ongoing now litigation to try and make sure that the landfills that are operating within the constraints of the contract that they sign, allowing them to have the landfill. And so we find that there are some landfills now that are in violation of the standards of their contract. And so they're going to be required to either bring it within standards of that contract or to cease operating. But that's going to be a decision that will be determined by the courts here in the near future.
Okay, very good. Let me get to a couple of more issues that are going to come up. I mentioned in the opening one of the House bills that will most likely receive a fair amount of attention is House Bill 4005, allowing guns on college campuses. Who wants to tackle that?
Well, I guess considering I'm the sponsor, I guess I might want to tackle that.
Well, no, I'm probably, okay, you, go ahead, continue on.
All right. No, the situation that we had at FSU, of course, we were going to file the bill prior to the situation that happened. There were 3 folks that got shot. One of the persons that was in a position that he could have taken out the shooter or at least made some retribution against the shooter. But what the whole purpose is right now in a gun-free zone, the law-abiding citizens don't have guns, but the bad guys bring guns in. So you're at the mercy of a bad guy with a gun. Now, what this bill does would allow concealed carry on a college campus. Right now, you can have your gun in your car on a college campus, but you can't have it on your person, even with a concealed permit. What this bill does is say if you have a concealed permit and you want to carry your gun onto a college campus, you have the ability, as long as that gun is concealed, in your backpack, under a coat, and it provides for more protection, not only yourself, but the persons around you. So, you know, if you pulled out your gun right now, I would protect my fellow members of the legislature.
And he would, and I'm behind him.
Are all of you in agreement with that, with this bill? I mean, what are your thoughts? Are there more expanded thoughts on it?
I agree with Senator Evers on this issue, and I would like to see it go even further because I've received calls from some of my constituents who own and operate private schools, and we're talking the K through 12 type private schools, and they're asking, as the administrators, the principals, and some of the teachers, why can't we bring concealed weapons onto our property to protect ourselves and our students? And I think that's a very good question, and I would like to see that addressed in the future. And I'm sure Senator Evers, being the NRA, would probably be glad to introduce some legislation like that.
You asked about mental illness earlier, Jeff, and you think about the logic of these gun-free zones. Most of these mass shootings we have seen on campuses have been the result of someone who is mentally ill. So do we really believe that the mentally ill person with the armed weapon on their way into a school is going to see the gun-free zone sign and stop and turn around? Of course not. So the policies we have now only hinder the ability of law-abiding citizens to respond. They certainly aren't stopping the tragic events from starting in the first place.
Okay. So essentially what this bill is not just anybody can tote a gun and you have to have a concealed weapons permit. And in order to do that, you have to be, what, at least 21 years old?
You have to be 21 years old. You have to be gone through a course. You have to be familiar with your weapon. And you also have to pass the test.
Okay. All right, very good. We are getting short on time, so we're going to try to run through as many questions as we can here just real quick, and I'll get kind of short answers from you. Neither Pensacola or Mobile are set with airports, according to a viewer, that safely support regional growth. Poor planning and politics have led to more money invested in short-term fixes. Why not use some of the BP money for a true investment in the region's future that will make a positive impact? And that's from a viewer. Anyone like to add to that?
Answer, go see the county commission, because under the legislation that all of us supported, federally and at the state level, the county commission makes the decision through their delegated authority as to what to do with the BP money. See your county commissioner.
Okay, all right, very good. Here's one, the controversy flying around. I almost hate to ask it, but I'm going to, because it kind of puts you guys on the spot a little bit, and handle it as you will. What's your take on the ongoing flap involving the governor and FDLE Gerald Bailey, and what should be done to address incidents like that? Anybody want to take that?
Look, it's a troubling situation anytime somebody's had a long and storied career and leaves, and there's always hurt feelings that are a result of that. And unfortunately, you know, this is not our greatest moment as a state. I think that the cabinet is going to look into it. The cabinet members have indicated that they're going to exercise their jurisdiction to determine what happened, and I think we all anxiously await those results.
But at the end of the day, the governor does need to be the chief executive and make decisions supported by his cabinet members about who heads FDLE and other cabinet agencies. But as Matt indicated, cabinet members will look into this issue and determine if there was anything untoward. But at the end of the day, when we vote for a governor, we vote for a chief executive.
Okay, and in about 2 minutes, a real local question here, courthouses and funding. Santa Rosa County needs a new one, and apparently Okaloosa needs some restoration.
Yeah, the last courthouse that the legislature funded cost $8 million in Chipley. The current request in Okaloosa County is for a $17 million courthouse, and in Santa Rosa for a $50 million courthouse. So I think we have to sometimes sanity check the price tags before deploying state capital.
Okay. I think Santa Rosa is going to get there. The ballot that came out last had 3 or 4 locations. It was kind of a convoluted question. I believe it confused the voters. I am convinced that the people of Santa Rosa County want a better judicial center. And the county commission is going to continue to put this on the ballot until they find a form that the people will accept. The problem is, if we don't, we're going to end up being sued, and it could cost more than $50 million if we have someone shot. We're having jury members, witnesses, and others that are in confined places.
Okay, very good. Gentlemen, we are out of time. Thank you so very much. We appreciate your time this evening. Best of luck as you head back to Tallahassee for the 2015 session, and we'll probably all sit down again after the session's over and see how things are coming along. Thank you so much. Best of luck. Happy New Year to you. And a great thanks to all of our viewers this evening for sending in and calling in questions. We greatly appreciate that. Our guests this evening have been members of the local Northwest Florida Legislative Delegation, Senators Don Gates and Greg Evers, Representative Clay Ingram, Mike Hill, Doug Broxson, and Matt Gates. Our broadcast has come to you from the Phyllis and Michael Johnson studio over the television airwaves of WSRE TV, PBS for the Gulf Coast, and News Radio 1620. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope you have a safe and wonderful evening. Take great care.